Hi, everybody, and welcome to our last module of Forsa School. Thank you all for being here. And Stefan, thank you for coming on board with this really exciting topic. So I am Nahla Tabba. I'm one of the co-founders of Forsa School, which is an initiative that Sharjah Art Foundation and Naqd critic put together as a way to arm creative professionals with the tools and hacks they need to really survive these difficult times. And Stefan Messam is a professor, an associate professor in foundations and design at Zayed University. And I mean, Stefan, we brought you in here for several reasons, one of which I've worked with many of your students, and they have sung so many praises about how impactful your exercises were at really deepening their practices. And I've seen this across the board. Everybody speaks so highly of the way you've conducted this. And of course, creative blocks has been something that really intensified in the last year. There are so many people that we came across who just said, I feel blocked. I've not been able to respond to the situation. And then, you know, it becomes this like vicious cycle because you're sitting there, you're blocked, you can't really get out of it. And that starts to eat at your validation, your feelings of failure, and your productivity levels. And sometimes you absolutely can't get out of that. Others seem to thrive under this maybe more different or restrictive way of working. So we are here with Stefan to hear all about the different ways you can deal with those art blocks. Now, for those of you in the audience, please, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the Q&A section of this session, and we will address them as soon as we can towards the end of the session. All right, Stefan, it's all yours.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. It's great to be here, and thanks for having me at Forsa School. It's been a really great experience through the workshops and meeting a few of you face to face. It's great to have a class again, actually, that we had at the Clay Corner Studio. We've been online now teaching for the last almost a year, so it's been quite a challenge for both my students and myself. But what really comes up with that is the frustrations and those elements that create that art block, and you can't really discuss the current climate without really thinking about the impact of the pandemic on the way that we think and the way that we live our lives. So today is not so much just about dealing with art blocks, but really the idea of how we manage our process. It's about looking at reflection, a lot of self-reflection and resolutions that come from that. So when I was approached to do this workshop, I first of all looked at how I approach my own creative practice, number one, and my own areas of where I might be blocked or just stuck and trying to figure out a way out of it. So I am an art educator, art and design educator at Zayed University, and my favorite area to teach is in foundations-based work, where typically we have a lot of students who don't know how to begin necessarily being creative or what to do. They've got the desire, but they don't know how to push that forward. And so that creates a really interesting dynamic for me. And as an educator, I'm always trying to think, you know, how do I get started and where is my area of interest? So I've tentatively called this disruption, about making breakthroughs in our process. And so the first thing I asked myself was, you know, why do we get blocked, or how do we stop ourselves from beginning? And when we had the workshop a few weeks ago, I had the participants start to write out a bunch of things as to why they felt they got blocked, or what stopped them from starting, or what stopped them from finishing a project. And I found this really interesting because we had a nice range of participants. we often talk a lot about time being a big issue for us. Time is one of the ones where we go, I don't have enough time to do that. And I know personally that I use time as an excuse for a lot of things. And I look at my day and I wonder where that time goes and how I can make time to be productive. Skills is another one that people often come across where skills are a factor that we don't feel like we have the skill set we need to do the things we want to do. I agree with this one, but also I think we use that as sometimes as a barrier for us to not begin. So if I only do this, then I can do that. Tools is another one where we don't have the things, and so we go to creative minds and we buy a whole bunch of stuff. And then we come home, and we've all done this, I'm sure. We come home like, I have all of these things that I need now, but still, sometimes you don't quite have the motivation to move forward. And those same tools, and trust me, you can look around my studio, still sit on a shelf brand new.
I'm so guilty of it. I'm very ashamed. I'm the same.
Yes. And so we use tools as like, I've only had the right tools, but normally we just use that to go and buy stuff, which is also kind of fun. But it also makes you excited to begin, but then it's the beginning part. And then overwhelmingly in the feedback that we got in that discussion it was psychological. There's a lot of elements that play into our block or our rut or the things that we're stuck with that are mostly based around psychological elements, such as overthinking an idea. A lack of motivation that comes from not being good enough. You can see this written here on the notes. Feeling too busy, feeling that you aren't consistent, and a fear of failure was quite a consistent note that people made, that it wasn't going to be good enough to exhibit, that the idea wasn't strong enough. There's many reasons why people felt that they were psychologically somehow blocking themselves from beginning. And so when we look at...
sorry to add another layer of complexity to that, given what the world was going through last year as well and this year, it's also that feeling of, is what I'm doing actually relevant? Like, how is that contributing to the good or this emergency of everything else? And I think a lot of people lost sight of the value of what they were doing because of that.
I completely agree. I think that we feel like we first and foremost have to make a difference, and it stops us sometimes, again, psychologically, from just doing the things that we need to do to begin creating. And so that feeds into this idea of validation. Like, we feel like somehow we need our ideas and our work and our projects validated, whether it has to be accepted into an exhibition, whether or not the idea is strong enough, whether people will like my work, they will buy it, or whatever it might be. We put this idea that unless somebody else likes it, then it won't be validated somehow. And so when we look to others for that validation, I just make that little note because it stuck with me when I wrote it into the resource, was that when we look to others for validation and become concerned with how the project is going to be received, we've already given the power of that success to others, because it's starting to ride on how other people are going to view your project. And in my mind, and this is coming as somebody who completely gets blocked all the time, just as often as anybody else, it's like when I allow somebody else to determine the success of my project, I take away the power I have to have fun with that project, because I'm more worried about it being in an exhibition, being published in a book or somewhere else. And that does tend to stop mentally our own playfulness. And so, where's my little arrowy thing? So it comes down to what that value of disruption is. The value of a disruption is being able to kind of take away the things that we normally do and put them into another box and play. Now, I just put in a couple of slides here to consider these chaps here who You've got David Bowie, Bob Dylan, and Jim Carrey. None of them known for their art prowess. But what I really like about these guys is that their field of creativity and their boldness allows them to just do what they feel they need to do. And they've got, and actually both all quite competent artists, which I think is really fascinating. They're not necessarily known for their art. And I like this idea where we come at something from a place where we wouldn't normally come from. And these three guys who are entertainers, all of them fundamentally, have enabled themselves to go through a whole process of creating, which is not the place that they are going to be validated for. No one's going to say to Bob Dylan or David Bowie, no one's looking to validate them through their artwork, but it does not stop them from doing it. And I think there's something really nice in their courage, probably braver than you or I in a lot of ways because they are public figures. And their courage to actually put their artwork into the place with the profile that they have is pretty impressive. And sure, these guys have got confidence to burn, but at the same time, they are putting themselves in a position where they are going to be critiqued by the world for something that they're not necessarily known for. And that also brings, yes, sorry, Nahla.
Yeah, there's also this idea of like the masterpiece syndrome of you being extremely worried about not producing something as good as your one-hit wonder or your masterpiece. And I guess like this is what it is. If they are going to benchmark their artwork according to their music, for example, you're already failing at that because there's by no means like a comparison. And so letting go of that idea of like, oh yeah, it has to be as elevated as what I've previously produced is probably very liberating.
Yeah, it must have been. It's such an amazing step to take, and also to have that put into the world. I think there's a number of different artists, entertainers that play with art as a way of a complete sideline to their work as an entertainer or whatever it may be. We look at, I put this one up of the Scream, Edvard Munch's The Scream, which I adore and always have done. One of the first artworks I remember discovering and analyzing when I was younger. But what struck me by this particular artwork is it came from a different place. He didn't just hit the canvas with this amazing sort of expressive piece of work, but he actually came at it from a poet's mind. And so the poem next to it is actually where the artwork came from, and it shows this idea between transitioning between formats, which I thought was really interesting. And of course, you have the Dada movement, who are experts in disrupting things. That's in fact the entire premise of Dada, is to put things into place which don't feel like they should belong and try and make the context from that. And I always find that their exercises, and a lot of my old students will probably notice that we're often throwing things into the workshops or into an exercise which they weren't expecting to see, in the hope that it will generate a response that will be unexpected. And there's something very powerful and liberating in that idea, where we can interject and change the context in some ways. So it leaves us, when we look at our excuses, with the notion of finding some time. So I'm going to cover a few elements before we begin in a bit of detail. One is finding that time, the one that we don't feel that we have. The aesthetic value, or we feel you sit with your creative process. Perhaps one of the more important ones is your visual connection to the world and to the environment. But lastly, and most importantly, and I say this to myself all of the time, is identifying your excuse. Because I do have an excuse. I always have an excuse for not doing, procrastinating, or what have you. And I'm sure many of us do. And the more we start to believe our excuse, the more we start to build that little wall that's harder to get over. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to go over a few sort of exercises or tips and techniques that I think work. Not just, I come at this, by the way, full disclosure, I come at this as an illustrator and a drawer, but I don't think that these exercises are limited to that in any way. In fact, you can find your own way to tweak or move the exercises into slightly different places. And you'll see what I mean as you see a few of them unfold. So finding the time. Now I came across this about 10 years ago now, where I was dealing with this instance that I just had a little bit of time and I was looking for a new project. And I picked up a sketchbook and I just started drawing in the sketchbook. And I always had that thing, I don't have the time. And I started finding time, or pockets of time, waiting in queues, like waiting for my coffee to be made. And so that would take 5 minutes because there may be a small queue. And so I'd start drawing. And then I'd do it while I was having lunch, or I was waiting. And back in the olden 10 years ago, you had to wait at a Tesla or to pay something or Devo. Whenever we were waiting, and those queues are long. And I remember, 30 minutes is quite a lot of time. Back then also, I never had an iPhone and I didn't do any scrolling. And now I will attribute my phone to a really strange little time sucker. It takes my attention away, and I know, and I see myself doing it, and I know that I'm not doing anything productive with it. I'm in fact reading the same thing I read 5 minutes ago or 10 minutes ago. And so therefore, I'm trying to get into the habit of leaving the phone behind. So I might go out somewhere and leave the phone behind. It stops you from looking at it because it's physically not in your place. The phone is a big one. Meetings are one of my favorite places to draw because meetings, you can look like you're actually writing notes and stuff, but you're actually doing something in your workbook. And it also actually helps me focus on what's being said, and that might be just me as a drawer, but I find it really useful. I find pockets of time and starting small with 5 or 10 minutes is a really good little place, but it's contingent on you bringing a book or something with you that you can work on. This also builds your practice, and it builds your notes and your ideas. They start to come through more readily the more you let them out. I always say to students that when we talk about a workbook, the ideas have to come out first before you can see whether they're any good or not. Because if we leave them in here in our head, we just spin them around in our head and they never really go anywhere. But when you put them down, I always think of it as emptying your mind out so that more ideas can help it flourish. And I think that's really one of the valuable elements of being able to make your notes, make your sketches, and allow your mind to empty so that it can be filled up with new ideas. One is deciding on your aesthetic. Now, sometimes I feel that we are hard on ourselves for allowing ourselves to be influenced. We often will say that, we don't want to copy somebody else, and we don't want to do all of these things that feel like we are borrowing too closely from others. And in some ways, I agree. In other ways, I think we need to cut ourselves a break, because sometimes we enjoy the things we see or admire the artists we admire for a really good reason. And that is because we are influenced by that, or it pleases us in some way. And so finding out where we sit aesthetically in our own minds, I think is a really important part of how we generate our own response to that. So I say, allow yourself to be immersed by those that you really admire and that you really enjoy. Allow yourself to have that influence that makes you want to be a creator. But most importantly, look at the materials you want to use. Now, some of you might be digital illustrators, some of you might be sculptors, you might be textile, you might be pattern. Find out the materials that you can work with that may be a shift aside from the artists and the influences that you're from. And when you start to pull all of these elements together, you'll start to build an aesthetic that you feel comfortable in moving ahead with. And also don't be, yes.
I think there's also this fear of not being consistent with your practice. So if you're a ceramicist, but you suddenly want to draw because that's the time you can find in between your meetings, there's this fear of, I should not be exploring another methodology when I identify being with this one other thing. So it's also about letting go again, like of an outcome-based commitment to practice that only you decided to make. Like it's not that necessarily anyone imposed that on you.
And kind of why I wanted to show the slide of David Bowie painting, or like these guys have everything to lose by putting themselves out there that way, but they have decided not to be judged that way and allowed that to happen. And you're completely right. We build up this idea in our own mind that this is what we are and who we are, and I think we effectively give ourselves a block. We stop ourselves from being better in a strange way, and that sort of brings me through to my next point, which is to find your visual connection. Now, this one's a really important one in regards to what gets you up into this creative space. And so a visual connection, so for me, for example, I love the urban environment. I like the build-up of old buildings and cranes and old stuff worn that are building and wearing down the city at the same time. Other people love botanicals. Other people love Islamic patterns. Other people might like grass. I don't know what people respond to, but find out what that thing is that makes you want to create, and then go for that walk down through your neighborhood and find those things. Find those little patches of cracks on the wall, or I also have I really enjoy looking at number plates, and it's everybody's got a certain thing that they are drawn to, and then start finding visual connections and patterns in your environment. Start recording them and collecting them. These things are the things that sustain you creatively and visually. It could be, if it's perfume bottles, it's perfume bottles. Whatever it is that you react to and respond to, you need to nurture it, and you need to allow. I think lots of artists and designers are collectors, whether they're visual collectors or actual collectors. They like being able to please themselves with the things they see, and we need to you need to nurture that in order to fuel your creativity. And of course, lastly, is identify these excuses. Is it your confidence? Is that confidence coming from other people? Is that confidence coming, or that lack of confidence coming from a lack of skills? Find out what these elements are. Is it time? Is it a fear of failure? I think we've all got a small touch of a fear of failure. I also know, teaching for a long time, and also as a practitioner, the idea of putting your art into the world can be quite scary. And so there's that, again, that judgment or that validation that comes, that we're seeking in that. Also the sense of purpose. It can seem really futile to be doing a cute little sketch of a character when the world is falling down around us. It feels like it anyway. And so, you know, that sense of purpose, you can remove yourself momentarily from having to make a change, and also identify with yourself the need to create, because that's actually why you're doing it. Number one is actually to fulfill a need to do that, that act of creativity. The other things then feed into that, a sense of purpose. Your confidence will build. And also, once you begin finding those pockets of time, you'll start to see that time extend a little bit more. You'll start finding reasons to do the work rather than reasons not to do the work. I found this really prevalent when I was doing quite a big project. We started with those little sketchbooks and turned into I was spending my whole summer holidays working on it, and was loving it. And so once you find those excuses, then you can address those barriers. And this leads us through into the next part. Number one is process is the key to productivity. And process is the part where we come up with the idea and we explore and play and decide how a project is going to take shape, whether you're a ceramicist or a drawer or a model maker or an illustrator or a musician. Like, it doesn't matter what you practice. What matters is that you go through the process. And I always say this to my students, is like, the first idea is normally the worst idea. But it allows you to take a starting point to start pushing your ideas out and pushing them around. And the process allows you to create and build and establish your idea. Some processes might take a week, some might take a year, some might take 3 years. Process is something as long as it needs to be in order to get the outcome you are hoping for at the end. And to me, the process is a more valuable story often than the article or the outcome. Students of mine who have been in my classes will know that I weight, when I grade their work, I weight the process as much as I weight the outcome. So it's normally 40% for the outcome and 40% for the process. And that's because I value that element that tells the story of your outcome as much as anything there. And so it allows for you to refine the work. It takes time, and we have to accept that it takes time and that the outcome isn't necessarily immediate. And I think that's an important thing to manage. Being playful in your work, which we'll talk a little bit in a moment, and enjoying, and remember the fact that we create and we do what we do because fundamentally we enjoy it. None of us do it because we dislike it. And if you keep that in your mind and you ask yourself, am I actually having fun? And if the answer is no, then reassess what you're doing and decide how you can make it fun for yourself. And again, I've got a few little tips and tricks that might help with you to just kind of break some of those ideas. And perhaps the most important thing to learn from this is to fail. Allow yourself to fail. In fact, expect to fail. The more you create the expectation of not working, the more you'll be comfortable with that. And that sounds counterintuitive, but the more failures you have, the more you have to build on as you move your project forward. And And I still speak with a lot of students, and they put their process forward. And I know that they've done a lot of different ideas, but they don't put those ideas in the process because they might not have been such good ones. I'm like, well, show me those ideas, because these ideas are the reason you made this other decision. And they're just as exciting to me as a educator to see why you don't go for an idea as to why you go for a stronger idea. And it's important for you to know those things as well. So that leads us to tips and tricks. So number one, I've got this nice loud slide here, which hurts my eyes looking at it, so I hope it hurts yours as well. That just says play. Number one is be playful. Oh man, it really hurts your eyes. Let's move that. And let's just play. Disruption's about breaking that normal pattern of work. So if we're used to doing things in a certain way, and I'm really, really guilty of those things, I find it hard to break out of the drawing mold because it's so easy, a pencil and a piece of paper, and I can do most things. But disruption's about breaking that pattern. And so there's a few exercises here that kind of touch on some main concepts. And one is the external influence. So allow ourselves to find something that doesn't belong to us and play with that and see what happens, because somebody else's idea can help you fuel your own. And if you think about it, films do this all the time. They will take, or TV shows, they will take an idea like, let's say, Batman, but then they'll explore a different character in another TV show. And so they take the influence of something that's already created and they move it into a place to try and stimulate another story or another idea. And so an external influence can be a really useful way to explore your own reaction. Responding, so I'm going to talk a little bit about context. Contributing, and how you might work with that. I've also got a little collaboration, reconnecting, and perspective. So let's go through and see what this is. So the external influence was one of the activities we did in the workshop recently, in which I gave the participants a scene or a landscape scene and asked them to add to the scene. The scene was really designed to feed off the line work that was happening. And so as we did this, it's a chance, and I did this recently just for the sake of this presentation. And what I found when I started working with this, and I saw this with the participants in the workshop, is that soon the actual drawing that you start with becomes less of your focus, and your own work and your own response to it becomes where you're at. And that's for the simple fact is that you are now contributing or adding to this. What I noticed when I was doing this drawing was that I was trying to kind of find a way to subvert the drawing. So I wanted to find a way that I could take this building and make it a part of my image. And it was a really fun little exercise, and you probably can't quite pick it up, but then my daughter came along towards the end, and then she started drawing a few bits and pieces in there. There she is. And so it becomes a little contagious, because once people see you doing it and you're doing it yourself, it starts to build on itself. And this is really, truly just a matter of finding something that I can react to or work with that I hadn't perhaps thought about doing before. And it becomes a little addictive. And let's check out my time. And what I also noticed was that I started to try, my technique of drawing started to refine the more I went along. First, I was really uncertain about how to tackle this, and I thought, oh, maybe this isn't such a great idea. But then the more time I started spending on it, the more I started to realize that that I was refining my technique, and I was trying to find new ways to explore a few of the pens that I was working with. I also gave myself a fairly liberal ink base to work from, which would allow me to react to it. So responding or contributing. And so this was another one we did with the workshop, where I gave out a number of different scenes. Some of them were Edward Hopper paintings, where it allowed you to create a context for the work. And within that context, it allowed you to contribute to the narrative. And this is really, in my mind, really important, because what it does is unlocks a way of thinking that you didn't know the answer to before you had the activity. And when you think of things being an activity that unlocks parts of your way of thinking, it then helps you free up your own work when you come through to it. And so, for example, you might take something like, I'm a huge Edward Hopper fan, but you might take an image like this and then examine what's happening on the other side of this image. This was an exercise I did as a student in illustration many 20 years ago, to be honest. And you had to replicate the style. So it was a master's study, as well as you had to draw the other half of the painting, which was super fun. So we would take these kinds of exercises and decide what was happening through the other side. The thing that was really interesting about that is, as I said, it forces you to react and to contribute an idea, because half an idea has been given, and then the other half can be anything you want it to be. And once you start to connect with that concept, then you start to unlock parts of your brain that are holding you back from perhaps pushing some boundaries. And there are some of the examples that we had in the workshop, which were super fun. This one, I think, was one of my favorites, in which she started turning it into a serial killer village, which was fun. And this is kind of going to be a slightly unusual one. Collaboration is one of those ones where, you know, you normally find a like-minded artist and or somebody who's got a slightly different skill set from you. But for this particular collaboration, I like my children, because any child will do, but my children are good, but you can't use them, I use them. But if you find a child that can really, and any child should do this, that really connect with their environment and the way that they see things. And my daughters are very good at observational drawing, and they're very willing participants. And so I just say to them, let's go down and draw. And so we went and drew the mosque, which is close to where I live. And they're happy to do it. There's a lot of things that kids really engage with, first of all. That is time being spent with them. But then when you start talking about the environment that you go through, they notice things that you don't notice, and they'll ask questions that you take for granted. For example, this particular, a lot of the mosques have the Antar shawarma house underneath it, and that's their focal point. 100% is the shawarma house. But they'll talk about the people that work there, they'll talk about who's visiting. And this starts to come out from a place of observation. And what I really enjoy with kids is that they observe things that we take for granted all of the time. And so this particular little collaboration with them is I've got two daughters. I'm lucky enough to have twins. So one is very clinical, so she spends her time with a ruler and drawing all of the straight lines of the mosque, and a lot of the quite detail oriented. And she will spend half an hour she'll spend half an hour doing this, kind of focusing on these little small parts, which I really think was great. And then my other daughter does the opposite. She'll do this in like 30 seconds. And what I love about both approaches, but in her one, is she's super sure of the lines she's making. You'll notice that she doesn't really go over a line a second time. She's like, this is the line, and this is it. And this is what I believe Picasso meant when, you know, your goal is to draw as a child, because he has that confidence in a line. And so I asked her if we could trade drawings, and she drew on my sketch, and I drew on hers. And so it gave me the opportunity to look at the mosque turret in a slightly different way that I had been observing it. And so I had to sort of deal with some lines that I otherwise would never see myself. And so it creates, but also an opportunity to connect with a creative mind that's in a different place to you. And sometimes when we think of a collaboration, we think that we have to be really elevated and supplement each other. But it doesn't have to be that way. It can be in a way where we can be, we can come in from completely different places and work together. And it creates this really nice way of thinking as a unit. And so, yeah, I think you can really find some ways forward with working with them. Now, I say children because I hesitate to use the word non-artist, because I think that suggests that some people are artists and some people aren't. I don't subscribe to that. I think everybody's got the capacity to create. I couldn't be a teacher if I thought that I could only teach certain people. That doesn't make any sense. But if you've got people you could also find people that are less inclined towards creative processes, is the way that I would say that. You can have a lot of fun with them too, where they see things in a way that they haven't developed a rendering skill, or they haven't developed certain things, which makes it really fun to be with, because you're seeing the same thing in different ways. It's important for this kind of exercise for me to work from observation, so that you're both seeing the same thing, but you're both translating it slightly differently. And that's part of the beauty of a nice collaboration. This was the other drawing. So I'd done this little sketch here, and then Tui, my daughter, did Antar underneath and finished off my tree for me. God bless. All right. So another tip. I think this one is one that I do a lot more. This one I do a lot more often than I realized I do when I went through sort of my back catalogue of images. Was firstly, I take my visual connection, or sometimes I take an old project or something I'm working on, and I try to change my perspective on it. And so this, if I was to say, if you were to tell me to go out into the world and find things that I connect with visually, I really love these kind of industrial structures and machines. The older and rustier, the better. I love the idea of the type up against that, so they try and beautify it somehow, but it never kind of works, but it kind of is beautiful. I love this stuff. That's what I respond to. And so I just went through the process, and I've been doing this for a little while now, of just building it, like, I don't have any real plan when I start. I just start messing with it and seeing what happens. I try and use some loose measurements. And when you do these things, it kind of gives you, the opportunity to create something that perhaps you can't draw, which I quite enjoyed. And so that's where I've been sort of focusing a little bit And to round it off, I started the idea of reconnecting with old projects. I think this is something that we overlook a lot, and that is we might have started a project like this one is like 20 years old, easily. And I was doing it and didn't really, I was actually really invested in it, to be honest. I'd done a whole picture book. It was 32 pages. It was paced out. I started drawing it. I illustrated a whole bunch of it. I was sort of, something wasn't kind of working, but I was probably worked on it for about a year. And I did this whole collage stuff and drawing, and I was really good at disrupting my game. And then I think somebody had said something to me, and I lost all motivation and inspiration. And it was a little unfair of me to react, perhaps not badly, but just like I just lost interest. I tried to pick it up again, and then when I started doing these little fellas here, I'm like going, that kind of looks like what I was doing here. And so then I'm like, maybe I can just start messing with this idea, with that idea, and see if I can get the ideas to play. And I think I have got no designs at this moment to actually complete this, but now I can start to see it gives it a bit of, when I'm doing these models, I actually get a little bit of focus into a particular direction. And now I spend my time thinking, how can I make this model stuff work with my illustration stuff? And then how can they all be best friends? And how can I make the next big project? And you know, I think revisiting old weird little projects that you forgot, and I truly have forgotten about this one, is a great way to revisit. It's been, as I said, almost 20 years, is to revisit your skill base. You then can go, well, what do I know now that I didn't know when I first began this project? And how can I take those things and move them into a new place? And that is the exciting part. That's part of playing. That's part of exploring. But more importantly, it's part of the enjoyment that I get from the making and the playing, and that might end up turning into an outcome. Might not. But you know, I'm trying not to put that focus on just yet. So in conclusion, identify your excuse. What is it that stops you from doing that and from doing the work, from being creative? And try to put aside this idea of, in particular, validation, that somebody else needs to make sure that you are doing a good job. And I even say that as an educator, because I know that students have to create work for me to grade. And I still tell students to put that out of their mind. If they focus on the playing, the rest of the things will come. If they try to please me, they will only be disappointed in the work that they create. Visually connect, again, for me, it's cranes in urban environments, but if you like cracks, if you like ink spots, if you like botanical elements, find the thing that inspires you and makes you want to be creating. And then establish that process of exploration. Find that way to move that through, to play, to be playful, and to take the pressure away from yourself. Process will allow you to have several outcomes. And this is what I love about at the moment, you know, things like playing with the models and drawings, that because I'm doing so much of it, I've got like a whole range of stuff around that I will become an outcome or several outcomes. And that way you might end up having a whole load of stuff for an exhibition that you weren't anticipating on having before you began. And I think that's the end. Relax, enjoy, fail. I think that's my ultimate advice. Enjoy the process of failing so that you can lead to more success. The end. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much. I want to ask if anyone in the audience has any questions. If so, please feel free to put them into the Q&A or the chat. But Stefan, yeah, thank you so much for this. I think the highlights especially is this idea of collaboration, but also combining, you know, different elements of other ideas. Like I think we also need to remember that we are bountiful, abundant in our creative practices, in the sense that we can never actually run out of things to do or things to think about. But to have a backlog of those things stored somewhere would be really useful. If nobody has any questions, or if anyone has any questions, let us know. But mostly you're getting a lot of comments about this idea of revisiting old projects.
Yeah.
Absolutely love the idea of working with your children as well. That's brilliant. We did get one question, which is, what would your advice be for young artists and designers to respond with the underconfidence that comes from a lack of skills?
I mean, that's probably one of the most common ones, because I think we don't have confidence because we don't have the skills. And then we don't begin because we don't have the skills, and it becomes this almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so it depends on what the skill is and how much you can teach yourself, and where you might need to go to get some tutoring or some mentoring. So for example, if I wanted to do ceramics, I would have to find somebody to help me with ceramics. I'd go to the clay corner and find out what that process is, because there's a lot of technical elements towards that. But if it's sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to say that's actually the least of the problems, given that building a skill set is actually so incredibly accessible here in the UAE.
And it's technical. It's a technical issue. Like it's no more different than learning to drive a car. Like, you can learn how to use the equipment and use the tools. And I think if you approach it that way, the only thing you need to come out is like, what am I going to make with this great new skill set? But like anything, learning to drive a car or learning to use your phone, you know, these things take a little bit of time, and you have to invest in that time to begin. But I would also say that anyone that is willing to teach is very patient, and they're designed there to help you make the best out of whatever it is you want to do. And so it comes down to your willingness to learn. But it does take a little bit of what's the word? Confidence maybe to get in and have a go. But is setting aside that time. So let's say you're going to clay corner, or you were going to say, I have to do this every Saturday in order to keep the momentum of that moving. And momentum is quite important to learning a skill set. So the more you do it, the better you become at it. But I did a similar thing maybe about 2 spring breaks ago, and I realized that I hadn't really approached oil painting. And so I just spent a whole 2 weeks playing with oils and got kind of good at it. I was quite happy. Well, I found I got good at it, but you know, like, it's kind of I was trying to invest maybe 2 or 3 hours a day in doing the painting. And I just had 2 weeks to do that. And so I was hoping to do that for the lockdown, but I was terrible at it. Yeah, are there any other questions?
I think we are good in terms of questions. Please let us know if you have any questions.
Well, I had fun painting throughout the talk, which is excellent. I fully endorse painting and drawing when somebody else is talking. And I did most of my major project to one of my lecturers when I was at school.
I think, okay, we may have had another question come in. Are you planning on doing another art-related webinar anytime soon? So Stefan, are you giving workshops like this at all to the public?
I haven't been because my life is at ZU, but I'm open to it. This is a really good forum because I think that there's a lot of really great networking that goes through Forsa and Sharjah Art Foundation. So maybe next time we're doing something similar. Find a different topic to tackle.
Well, do you have any books or sort of places that you go to read a little bit more about creative blocks, imposter syndrome, and that kind of thing? Like, if you could recommend to us your favorite book in the whole world, what would it be?
My favorite book in the whole world, I actually put this into the resource toolkit that you asked for. It's called the RSVP Cycles, and I think I can't remember what the subtitle is called, but like the creative processes of the human environment, I think, from memory. And what it did when I was a student, it was the first book I kind of came across as a student, design student 20 odd years ago. And it gave you tools, well, not directly, like it's written as a series of articles, but it gave you ways to think about your environment that made my mind completely open up to the environment around me. It's called, and there was one thing that I remember completely. It had a musician who had collected punched out tickets from a parking building, and they were a standard size, and there's little holes punched in there. And what he had done was he had made a grid for notes of music, and he would slide the punch card over it, and then he would select the notes. So the notes were given to him completely randomly based on the punch card that he slid over the top. So he had no control over what would come up. And it just opened my mind to the way that you can allow the environment and the things you connect with to creatively impact on the way that you plan. And so I thought that book blew my mind. There's also another book that I return to a lot called Armin Hoffman's. It's called The Graphic Design Manual, but I don't like that as a title, because it's really about the principles and elements of design, and he's a master. He's a master of composition and shape, and how to manipulate them in a way that we don't expect.
Okay, so we have run out of time, but thank you so much, Stefan, for being with us and your generosity and taking the time to also give our Forsa participants even more to do practically. It was really wonderful to see those outcomes as well. Yeah. And as mentioned, Stefan will be sharing his kind of toolkit, which will speak a little bit about these books, his creative process, and a couple of exercises and prompts to help you unhinge as well. And this is going to be recorded and available to the public. So if you have friends or audiences who have missed out on this, don't worry, it will be up on the Sharjah Art Foundation website. So again, thank you, Stefan. And we hope to catch you at some of the upcoming sessions as well. Please feel free to join us.
Yes, will do.
All right, take care of yourself.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.